Today, I'm answering a question from a viewer. Now, this comment was actually left on a video about building a word index. It was an interesting question, and I put together a solution, and I thought I might share that with you today. So Phil says, I'm trying to do something a little bit different, which is to index entire sentences that contain certain words like a person, Phil, Rob, etc., and also months of the year, like December and March. Then instead of an index that references the page numbers in the document, I just want all of the Phil sentences collected together in an appendix, all of the Rob sentences collected together in an appendix, and all the by month sentences collected together in their appendix. So I have one appendix for Phil, one for Rob, and one for December, and one for March. How the heck do I do that? Well, I actually solved this not by using an index feature, but by a clever use of the table of contents feature. So here's a simple document I've mocked up. I've got a couple of sentences which I've marked in orange that contain the word Phil. So one here halfway through a sentence and one there at the beginning of the sentence. I've also got two sentences marked in green that refer to Rob. Again, Rob's at the beginning of this sentence, but I'll put Rob at the end of this second sentence down here. And this below is what we're aiming for. So we've got Phil's appendix, we've got Rob's appendix, and every sentence that contains the word Phil somewhere or Rob somewhere, anywhere in that sentence, gets picked up as a whole sentence and included in these appendices. This example only does Phil and Rob. I haven't worried about the months, but it's exactly the same concept for whatever you want to use it with. Most people use the table of contents feature to build a table of contents based on stuff that is styled in a certain way, normally heading 1, heading 2 and heading 3. But there's a second method you can build a table of contents, which is to use TC field codes to mark the things that you want to include in your table of contents, and then use the TOC field code to build the table of contents. So I actually use that logic, but not to build a table of contents, just to list out different appendices based on what's being asked for. In this case, that's an appendix for Phil and an appendix for Rob. So here's the method. Firstly, I'm going to do a search or a find for the word Phil. It doesn't matter where Phil appears in a sentence. It could be right at the beginning, halfway through, or at the end. It doesn't really matter. But once it finds an occurrence of Phil, it's then going to find the beginning of that sentence and then select the whole sentence, because that's what's been asked for. They want the whole sentence included in an appendix. Once it's isolated the sentence, it then inserts a TC field code using that text and marking it with a special field within the TC field that has a unique identifier. So I've kept it very simple. It has to be a single letter identifier. So I've used P for Phil and R for Rob, and you'll see that in just a moment. It continues that process through the entire document, so whenever it finds an occurrence of Phil, it isolates and identifies that sentence, creates a TC field code, moves on to the next one, and it does that all the way through the document. I've then repeated the process for Rob. So at this point, the document contains a whole bunch of TC field codes, which can then be used and picked up by the table of contents. Now, our table of contents doesn't insert page numbers. They're not required here. All we need is the text that's been marked and collated together in a separate appendix. I've put all this together in a macro, so the macro just runs through the process for me. Now underneath this text here is just a blank bit of document, so that's where the document ends at the moment. My macro is up here, just on a button, so when I run it, this is what gets produced. I haven't bothered fixing up the formatting. That can be done by hand, that's fairly easy. But the hard work of going through the document, finding all the sentences that contain certain elements, and then summarizing them in this appendix, that's all been done, and it's all included in this macro code. If I just return to the top of the document for a second, and switch on the hidden formatting, this then shows all the hidden fields. And you can see here, after this first sentence that contains Phil, in the curly brackets, which is what fields are always enclosed in, it first of all puts the TC field code, then all the text that's been picked up in the sentence, followed by \FP. Now what the \F means is insert a field switch, and P is the identifier I've used for Phil. The \N at the end means don't insert page numbers or leader lines. And a leader line is just that dotted line or dashed line that you often get between the item and the page number in a table of contents. We don't need them here, so the /N just means switch them off, don't show them. And that's what I've done all the way through the document. So whenever it's identified a sentence, it creates and inserts this TC field code, and that then gets picked up at the end to summarize these appendices. Down at the bottom here, if I click on any of these items that have been summarized, you can see the grey shading, And that means that Word is controlling this in some way. Word is taking control of producing this for me. And if I press Alt F9, that's a keyboard shortcut to toggle all the field codes back to the fields or between the fields and the actual item that's being produced. And as you can see here, again, the curly brackets, the TOC, table of contents, it's used that \F field switch again, followed by P for Phil, and followed by R for Rob. And that's all we've got to do. That's all that's required to produce this summary. So now, let me walk you through the code and show you how it works. I'll also put a link to this file, so if you want to have a look for yourself and have a look at the code for yourself and run this through, and maybe adapt it for your own purposes, that will be in the show notes underneath this video. Just in case you're not too familiar with macros, any Word document you create that has macros that you want to run, you have to save as DOCM. That's a macro-enabled document, as opposed to a DOCX, which is a regular document. Also, to see the Visual Basic for Applications editor, press Alt F11. You can also press Alt F8 to get a list of all the macros that you might want to run from a menu. I've put the two side by side so that as we go through the code, you can see exactly what's running here. So let's start at the top and let's run through this. I've left the document exactly as it was, so all the hidden field codes are still there and all the TOC fields are down the bottom. So the first bit of the code just does a bit of a cleanup. This first line of code here switches on the hidden formatting. So if it wasn't already on, it would switch it on here. And that's required because the next little bit of code, or two chunks of code, search through the document looking for TC and TOC field codes and remove them. Now when you do a find and replace, most people just do find and replace with text. But you can actually use this special code here, which is the circumflex D followed by TC. And if you look for that, that's a special character, and that circumflex D is looking for the braces that enclose a field code. Selection.HomeKey unit equals word story extend equals WD move. That's just a line of code that says go to the top of the document. Then it does two identical chunks of code really. The first chunk of code says look for the TC field code and replace it with nothing. In other words, remove it. Second chunk of code does exactly the same for the TOC field code. Whenever it finds one of those, it's going to remove it. So let's run through this line by line, and you can actually see this in action. Okay, so let's run through the code, starting at the top. Now, F8 is a key you can press to step through line by line through your VBA code, and because I've got the document displayed as well, we can see what's happening as it happens. So the first three lines are just setting up some variables. This line, as I said before, turns the hidden formatting on, if it wasn't on already. This one goes back to the top of the document. This next chunk of code goes through, gets rid of all the TC codes. As you can see on the document, they've disappeared. The next chunk of code, again, we're starting at the top of the document. It goes through and removes all the TOC field codes. That brings us to the fill section. We've now got a document that's free of field codes, but as you can see down the bottom, it's still got the Phil's appendix and a bit further down, Rob's appendix. So I could add a bit of code in here to remove those as well, but as it stands, it's going to add another Phil's appendix and Rob's appendix at the bottom of this document. So back in the code, after setting some variables, this do while be found is going to first of all go through and find all occurrences of Phil one at a time. I've left a lot of the default settings in here. I could actually remove a few of those to tidy up if I wanted to. But the most important line in this whole section is where it says at the bottom, be found equals .execute. So it doesn't do any of this until this line here, at which point it executes and finds the next occurrence of Phil if there is one. Then it comes down to this line here. So let's just step through there and get to that point. What this line says is if it found an occurrence of Phil, and let's just move that up so we can see this whole section, move to the beginning of that sentence, select the entire sentence, and then insert the TC field code with this text. Now as it comes down here, the TC text, it kind of built up a phrase. The character 34 is a double quote. The selection is what it found up here, the entire sentence, followed by another closing double quote. It then appends this F switch. So the \FP, that's the field switch that we said marks the fill entries, followed by the \N, which means don't insert the page numbers or the leader lines. So let's step through this. You can see on the document on the left how it's selected the whole sentence there. As we continue through, it inserts at this point the TC field code. And there we go. At this point, the cursor is outside the closing brace. So the next line says move 3 characters to the left. So it's ready to insert the bit of text that we just created a moment ago. Selection.typetext text equals TC text. That's the line we created just up here. So it's going to insert that as the next step. The next line says, okay, move back outside the braces and then continue looping through the document, finding the next occurrence of fill until we've got no more. So let's continue stepping through. This will go back to the top of the loop and do another find, see if it can find another occurrence of fill. Don't forget the bfound.execute is the point at which it does the find and replace. If it finds another one, it's going to then go into the code again, which it has done. So the second occurrence of fill over here, that's just been picked up again. So let's loop through, doing exactly the same thing. It's going to insert the TC field code, it's going to populate it with the text, append the field switches, and then go outside the braces again and continue through the loop. Now at this point, there shouldn't be any more left. So it goes through, it does the bfound equals.execute, but when it says if bfound then, at this point there shouldn't be any more. So when I press F8 again, now it has found one, and the reason it's found another one is because I didn't do my cleanup properly over here. So it's found the third occurrence of fill over here from the previous fill's appendix. Let's just go through this for the sake of completeness. So at that point, we've got the TC fill code for that third occurrence there. Let's loop through one final time. And at this point, it shouldn't find any more because that is the last one. So this time, bfound should be false. Therefore, it shouldn't go into the code. It hasn't done. It comes to the end of the if and the end of the loop. So next, it goes on to rob. And it does exactly the same process for rob. Go back to the top of the document, reset all the variables, and go through, find the occurrences of rob. Whenever it finds one, create a TC code, put the text in, append it with all the field codes. Now to save a bit of time, I'm going to insert a stop point down here at the point where it's about to build. So you click in the left margin on this editor, that inserts the stop point, and to get down there you just press F5, which cycles through the code and stops at that next point. Let's take a look at the document over here, and we can see that in Rob's section, the green sections here, it's also put those TC field codes exactly in the same way as we did for fill. The next bit's easy. We build the appendix based on the TC field codes. So this line says go to the end of the document. Again, it builds up some TOC text, which in this case puts the words filled appendix at the end of the document. There it is. There's another one over on the left-hand side. It builds up the switches. That's the F switch followed by the letter P for fill, and then inserts it at the end of the document under the filled appendix heading. Let's just run through these last three lines of text here. The character 13 and character 10 that you see up here and also up here, they insert a carriage return followed by a line feed, and that's the proper way to end a paragraph. If you don't put the character 10, the line feed in, sometimes that carriage return doesn't execute properly. It's always good to use those two things together. The rest of the code does exactly the same thing for Rob. So first of all, there's Rob's appendix, the heading. Then it goes through and inserts the TOC field code using the F switch followed by R for Rob, and that's our appendix built up. The last line says, switch off the hidden formatting. That gives us a nice clean finish. One final line, that's the end of the code. If we go back to the document and scroll to the top, you'll see it's nice and clean because all those hidden field codes, the TC codes, are now hidden. They're still there because we need them to build the appendices down the bottom. But down the bottom, you can see that it's still got this TOC field code visible. So all I'm going to do is to do Control A and then Alt F9, and that just toggles the field codes to actual content. So now we've got exactly what we're after, the summary underneath each appendix. So this code's a bit rough and ready, but hopefully you get the gist of what's going on here, and it should be fairly easy to adapt it to your own needs and your own purposes. So I hope that's been useful. Definitely subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and ring the bell if you want to get notified. And if you've got any questions, feedback, comments, those kind of things, share them in the comments below. Always love to hear from you. And I respond to every comment that comes in.